Okay, well, hopefully all this works. Let me turn off the AC, just in case that thing decides to interfere. Well, good morning. If it's morning for you, it's morning for me. This is part 3 of Interview with a Demon. But now we're not going to be talking about possession. We're going to go to oppression and deception. Oppression and deception. Deception would be like if you came to me in Fort Worth, because I live in Fort Worth, and you don't have GPS. You have a phone, but not GPS. And you're like, how do I get to Dallas? Well, I tell you, go down 35 South here and drive an hour. You'd end up in Waco. Okay, then you come to your senses, you go to Dallas. You get better directions. That's deception. You come to me and I lie to you and you accept that lie and you end up in Waco instead of Dallas. That's a form of deception. And we'll talk about demonic deception. We'll also talk about oppression. Oppression would be like doing the same thing, but you end up in Waco, but you call me again. And maybe even I begin to call you and I start instructing you to go all over the place, but you never end up in Dallas for a long time. And you're frustrated. You're just going all kinds of directions. That's oppression. Oppression, demonic oppression, not impression, is you're being bullied. That's what is occurring, is that you're being bullied to where you're just circling in confusion. So deception is the wrong direction. That's what we're going to talk about first. In Genesis chapter 3, we read about this first deception. In verse 3 of chapter 3 of Genesis, the serpent, it says, the serpent was more cunning than any of the beasts of the field, which the Lord had made. And he said to the woman, and this serpent is the devil, he said to the woman, this is Eve, has God indeed said that you shall not eat of the tree of the garden? Of every tree in the garden. So he's saying, look, you can eat of every tree, right? Did God not say you can eat of every tree? He's trying to cast doubt on God's instruction to Adam and Eve. So Eve responds and she says, well, we can eat of the trees, but not the one, the knowledge of good and evil. We're not supposed to eat of that tree. If you touch it, if you eat of it, you'll die. That's what God told them, and that's what she repeats to him. In verse 4, the serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die. You will not surely die. This right here in verse 4 is the lie of the enemy. This is the lie. In verse 5, he says, for God knows that in that day you eat of it, your eyes will be open. That's true. And you will be like God, knowing good and evil. That is also true. Really, the devil tells a lot of truths here. But he mixed in that first lie. You will not surely die. You're not going to die. That's the lie. Verse 6, so when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, pleasant for the eyes, and the tree was desirable to make somebody wise, it could make you wise. She took of the fruit and ate, and she also gave it to her husband, and he ate. Then the eyes of both of them were opened. See, it was true. They knew they were naked, and they began to sew fig leaves together to try to cover themselves. So what is happening here is their eyes were open, and yes, they knew they had knowledge of good and evil, so they did in a way become more like God. But because they received that knowledge in sin, they had no more discernment. And we still don't have discernment without God today between good and evil. We know good and evil, we just struggle with that discernment. And they did not die that day. In Genesis 2:17, God told them, the day that you eat of it, you will surely die. They didn't die that day. But they did. They didn't physically die, but spiritually they died. We're all dead apart from Christ in the spirit. But they did die about 900 years later physically. That which is spiritual occurs long before the physical. Things unfold in the spiritual before it does the physical. God knows the end game. He knows He knows the beginning and the end. He knows the end from the beginning. He knows everything. So when he says something, he says it for a reason. And the devil, well, he's looking to cause a bad end. God wants a good end. The devil wants a bad end. And this is deception. That deception, that direction to a bad end to get you to Waco instead of Dallas. He wants that bad end. He wants you to never get there. He wants us apart from God. He doesn't want us to have a relationship with Him. And one of the best ways He does that is deception. I do want to include that we do now have access to that tree of life, and that tree of life is Jesus Christ. I'd also want to mention that deception comes before oppression. Deception comes before oppression. Now we're going to read about the first oppression. We skip forward to Genesis chapter 4, verse 5. But God did not respect Cain and his offering. See, Cain and Abel were brothers, and they both gave offerings, but God didn't accept Cain's. And it says that Cain was very angry and his countenance fell. So the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? And why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door, and its desire is for you, but you should rule over it." So Cain had already been deceived because he gives an offering that's not pleasing to God. He's already been deceived. But now he's moving into oppression because he is angry, his countenance is fallen, and sin is just lying at his door. He's just entertaining sin, and sin is just right there at his door. So he's been deceived, he's beginning to become oppressed. And you read in verse 8, now Cain talked with his brother Abel, and it came to pass they went to a field and he killed his brother. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where's your brother?" And then here's that famous line, "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" He smarts off to God. He's deceived and he's oppressed. He's even smarting off to God face to face. He deceived his own brother. He's so demonically oppressed, he deceives his brother just to kill him. Now, I don't believe he's possessed by a demon, but I definitely know for a fact he is oppressed here. He's being bullied by demons. He's angry. His countenance is fallen. He's probably been jealous of his brother before any of this occurred. And sin is just sitting there at the door, just bullying him. One important thing I want to mention here is that sin desires us. See, we want to be desired. You can see that all over the internet. People want to be desired. Even I want to be desired sometimes. Not physically, I'm married, but we all want to be desired. We all want to be noticed. And sin desires us. And that's why temptations are tempting. Sin desires us. Real quick, I got a couple of things in the New Testament that makes this even easier to understand. We look at Peter. Peter gives us a great example of deception and oppression. In Matthew chapter 16, verse 22, Peter took Jesus aside and he began to rebuke him because Jesus was talking about going to the cross. And Peter wanted nothing to do with it. He's trying to talk him down from the cross before he ever got there. And Jesus rebukes him. He says, "Get behind me, Satan. You want the things of man, not the things of God." He rebukes Peter. And he even says to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." The reason being is because he's deceived. Peter is deceived. He doesn't want Jesus to go to the cross. He doesn't know the things of God. He doesn't understand God's plan. And that ends up graduating later to oppression. In Luke chapter 22, this is right before Jesus goes to the cross. It says, and the Lord said, Jesus says to Peter, Simon, Simon, because that's his original name, indeed Satan has asked you that he may sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for you that your faith will not fail, and that when you have returned to me, strengthen your brethren. But he said to him, Lord, I am ready to go with you, both to prison and to death. Peter says this. And then he said, I tell you, Peter, the rooster shall not crow this day before you will deny me 3 times that you know me. You're going to deny me 3 times, Peter, he says. A couple of things to understand here. Remember, we talked about permissions. You see that the devil's already getting permissions. Remember in the first 2, part 1 and 2, he's already getting permissions. It's already happening. And he wants to sift Peter. And Peter's telling Jesus, I'll die for you. I'll go to prison with you. Peter wasn't lying. That's what he wanted. When they came to get Jesus, Peter took out the sword. He was trying to defend and stop Jesus from being taken. He wasn't lying here. Where did the oppression come in? What was the problem? Remember where he was deceived. He was deceived because he didn't want Jesus to go to the cross. Jesus ends up getting apprehended, and he ends up being flogged and beaten, and he ends up being put on the cross. Peter wanted nothing to do with that. Unless he died with Jesus or died for Jesus, it wasn't going to happen. He wanted to die. Peter was the one that wanted to die. He despised the cross. He was deceived, and then he was oppressed. Because the devil knew he didn't understand. The devil knew some of his pride and different various things that I may not understand. Peter despised the cross. And he denied Christ 3 times. And you know the story. The crow crows 3 times. Not the crow. The rooster crows 3 times. And he weeps bitterly. He's being bullied by demons. He's gone down this path of despising the cross, and he doesn't understand, and he's hurting. But the good news here for us as Christians is that Jesus knows where we're going to mess up, and he's praying for us, and he has a plan for our return. He has a plan for our restoration, and that should encourage us all. So we can kind of see how Peter was deceived, and then how he was oppressed, and something as simple as a misunderstanding and maybe even a little pride can be used against us. So I hope this encourages you. Know that Jesus himself is praying for you. I'm praying for you, and we need to encourage one another with these words. So I hope this is a blessing to you, and it gives you a little insight on deception and oppression. So that's all for today.